Hello everyone, welcome to the second session of Philo 121 and GE 8. Now this session is about an introduction to philosophy. Particularly, we'll be talking about the definition, history, and branches of philosophy. This is what I know to be the best way to start a logic class or an ethics class. If you notice, we don't start right away with a definition of what logic is or what ethics is, but rather, I'd like to give you a good understanding of what philosophy is in general. That's why we'll be talking first about its definition, history, and branches. So, firstly, we'll deal with the definition of philosophy. Now, there are two ways to define a term. First is to look at the nominal definition of a term, and second is its real definition. Now, when we say nominal definition, we are looking at the literal structure or the etymology of a term from the root word nomen, which means name. So we will try to analyze the literal structure or the literal origin of the term philosophy. Specifically, we look at the Greek translation of the word philosophy and its Chinese equivalent. Secondly, we will also discuss, of course, the real definition of philosophy. Now, when we talk about real definition, we are looking at the real essence or real meaning or substance of a term. Though there are many real definitions of philosophy given by various philosophers, for this discussion, I'll give you the real definition of philosophy given by Aristotle and Karl Jaspers. Alright, so let's take a look first at the nominal definition of the word philosophy. Philosophy is an English term. Its Greek equivalent is philosophiae. Okay, philosophiae or philosophia is a compound term of philo and sophia. Okay. Philo means love or friend, and then sophia means wisdom. So put together, philosophia means love of wisdom. Or a philosopher is a lover of wisdom. Now there are two key concepts here that we need to understand. Namely, what is love and what is wisdom. Now love is basically an urge or an attraction of someone to somebody or to something. So when there is love, or when we are in love, we are attracted to the particular thing or object or person. Now in the case of philosophy, the person is attracted to wisdom. In other words, he or she does everything to possess wisdom. Now, the next question would be, what is wisdom? Now, wisdom is not equivalent to knowledge. However, knowledge and wisdom are related to each other because wisdom is the good exercise or the good application of knowledge. Now, what do we mean? Knowledge, when practiced or applied in a good way, becomes wisdom. In other words, knowledge does not always become wisdom because when we use what we know or when we use knowledge in a negative way or in a bad way, then it entails that we lack wisdom. Because wisdom only becomes wisdom when the knowledge that we have is applied or practiced in a good way. So a philosopher in the Greek context is someone who applies or practices his or her knowledge always in a good way, or for the good of himself and for the good of everyone, and never for the disadvantage of someone else. So on the whole, philosophia or philosophia means love or friend of wisdom. And if you are a philosopher, you do all means possible to acquire wisdom. And wisdom, once again, is the good exercise or the good application of knowledge. Okay. Let's turn to the Chinese translation of the word philosophy, which is Ze Shui. Other translations would be Che Shui. Okay. Ze Shui is also a compound term in which Ze means wisdom, while Shui means study. So put together, Ze Shui means the study of wisdom. Interestingly, both the Greek and the Chinese translations or nominal definitions of philosophy bear the word wisdom. However, there is a peculiarity in the way Chinese people understand the term wisdom. Because if you are going to recall, wisdom in the Greek perspective is the good exercise or the good application of knowledge. On the other hand, for the Chinese people, wisdom is our ability to be consistent with what we say and what we do. In other words, this is our ability to be consistent with our words and our actions, or our ability to translate words into actions. Meaning to say, if you say something and do the contrary, then that means that you lack wisdom, because you lack the consistency of what you say and do. So you are a person with wisdom from the Chinese perspective if you are capable of being consistent with your words and actions. Meaning, what you say, if you say that you have to do this, then you also do such a thing. For example, if you say someone that he or she should be honest, then you too should be honest yourself. Because if you say to someone that he or she should be honest while you are not honest, then that means you lack wisdom. Or if you promise something to someone and fail to fulfill that promise, then that means you lack wisdom, because you lack the ability to be consistent with what you say and do. So far, that's the nominal definition of philosophy. We looked at the literal or the etymological structure of the word philosophy, both as translated in the Greek and in Chinese. Now we turn to the real definition of philosophy. This time, we look at what really philosophy is. Now, we will take a look at the real definition of philosophy given by Aristotle, in which he defined philosophy as the science that inquires into the ultimate cause and principle of all things using the human reason alone. Now, this definition implies that, first, philosophy believes so much in the capacity of human reason to explain and understand the things around us, literally everything around us. So that's the first implication of Aristotle's definition of philosophy, because he believes that philosophy tries to know the very origin, the very history, the very foundation of all things, not with the use of anything else, but with pure reliance on human reason alone. Another point that is worthy of emphasis is, for Aristotle, philosophy is a science. And we know that science is a body of knowledge gathered through experimentation, observation, and so on. So philosophy tries to be as systematic as it can be in its quest to know the ultimate cause, or the truth itself. It's good to explain the difference between ultimate cause and proximate cause. Now, the proximate cause, as opposed to ultimate cause, the proximate cause is a cause, but it is also caused by something else. But the ultimate cause is something that causes all things to be, but there is nothing that causes it to be. In other words, the ultimate cause is the thing that causes all things to exist without anything, or without having anything to cause it to be. Now, philosophy tries to know the truth, the ultimate cause, the principle, the beginning, the foundation of literally everything using the human reason alone. That's philosophy for Aristotle. Next is the real definition given by Karl Jaspers. Now, Karl Jaspers, by the way, is a contemporary philosopher, and he defined philosophy as a discipline in which questions are more important than answers, and in which answers pave the way for other questions. Now, one thing is very obvious in Jasper's real definition of philosophy, and that is, questions are more important than answers. Now, we may be thinking that answers are more important than questions, but Karl Jaspers argues that it is the other way around, that questions are more important than answers. Now, one very obvious implication of this definition given by Karl Jaspers is that questions are more important than answers. Now, some of you may be thinking that it's the other way around, that it's the answers which are more important than questions. But for Karl Jaspers, and I believe for philosophy as a whole, questions are more important than answers, because by virtue of birth, questions are born first and then answers follow. Meaning to say, questions are born first and then later on answers will follow. Now, another reason why questions are more important than answers is that questions are more absolute than answers. When we say absolute, it's certain. Okay? Questions are so certain, but answers are not always certain. Now, why do we say that answers are not always certain? Because there could be two or more answers to a single question. And if there are two or more answers to a single question, then not all of those answers can be true at the same time. Okay? So, for example, the question, does God exist? That question is an absolute question, but there are at least three answers. Some will say yes, God exists. Some will say no, God does not exist, and some will say, we cannot know. And those three answers cannot be correct simultaneously. And so one could be true, one could be false. And so that's why we say that answers are not always certain, but questions are. Now, another reason why questions are more important than answers is that there are a lot of questions which don't have answers as of this time. Questions like, is there life after death? Is there heaven? Now, these are examples of absolute questions which don't have absolute answers. But one thing is for sure, for Karl Jasper's understanding of philosophy is that we have to pay attention to the kind of questions we ask. Because the kind of questions we ask dictate the kind of answers we get. We cannot get the right answer if we ask the wrong question. That is why questions are always and will always be more important than answers. And that is the nature of philosophy. That philosophy will ask all possible questions and will answer all those possible questions and will question the answer given to a previous question. So it's a question, answer, question enterprise. Okay, so basically that's the definition of philosophy. Now we turn to the history of philosophy. Now I should say that philosophy is as old as man. Philosophy started when man started to ask or to raise questions about the world, about himself. And so, philosophy therefore has a very long history. But for purposes of discussion, we will try to trace the history of philosophy by taking a look at the two wings of philosophy, namely Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. When we say Western philosophy, this is the philosophy that developed in America and Europe, while Eastern philosophy, also known as Oriental philosophy, is the philosophy that developed in Asia. Now, as far as Western philosophy is concerned, this wing is divided into four major periods or eras, namely ancient history, medieval, modern, and postmodern or contemporary philosophy. While Eastern philosophy developed or was developed by four major civilizations, like Indian civilization developed Indian philosophy. There's also Chinese philosophy, Japanese philosophy, and then Persian philosophy. Of course, there is also Korean philosophy, Filipino philosophy, but these philosophies developed after the philosophies in India, China, Japan, and Persia. Now, the next slides would be the presentation of some influential or prominent philosophers in ancient history, in medieval, in modern, in postmodern, in Indian philosophy, in Chinese philosophy, in Japanese, and in Persian. But I should start by saying that the philosophers included in the following slides are not exhaustive, meaning to say the list is not complete because I have only included the most influential and prominent figures. So there may be more other philosophers than those which are included in this presentation. So let's take a look first at Western philosophy, specifically under ancient history of philosophy. And the first philosopher here is Thales. And Thales believes that water is the principle of life. It is the foundation of life and of existence. On the other hand, Anaximander believes that the primary substance out of which all these specific things come from is an indefinite or boundless realm. Now, the common thing between Thales and Anaximander and other ancient philosophers is that they tried to answer a common question. And that question was, what serves as the ultimate foundation or principle of life? And the answer of Thales to that question is water, while the answer of Anaximander is indefinite or boundless realm. The difference between the answer of Thales and Anaximander is that Thales believes that water is the principle of life, and we know that water is something that we can see, we can touch. However, the answer of Anaximander, which is indefinite or boundless realm, is something that is abstract. Now, another ancient philosopher is Anaximenes, and for him, the primary substance or the principle of life is air, while Pitagoras believes that all things are numbers. We know Pitagoras as a mathematician, right? But prior to him being a mathematician, he is primarily a philosopher, and he became a mathematician because his philosophy focused on numbers. He became interested in mathematics for that appeared to be religious reasons. He held on to his conviction that the study of mathematics is the best purifier of the soul and would guarantee its immortality. Another philosophers are Heraclitus and Parmenides. Now, both of them looked at reality itself. For Heraclitus, reality is constantly changing. That reality is different yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That's why he said, and he's famous of the dictum or the saying that goes, you cannot step twice into the same river, because the water in the river is constantly flowing, constantly changing. And life in general also has that nature, that life and existence in general is constantly changing. On the other hand, Parmenides does not believe in change, because for him, change and diversity is an illusion. There is no change at all, because reality is one and never changing. Another ancient philosopher is Socrates. Socrates is linked to the idea which is knowing and doing. He linked between knowing the good and doing the good. Okay? That knowledge is virtue. If you know the good, then you are bound to do the good. If you know the good, yet you do the contrary, then there is something wrong with your personality or with your virtue. Plato, on the other hand, is famous on his allegory of the cave. Now, this allegory of the cave is a story of intellectual blindness and liberation. This is a story of prisoners who were chained inside the cave, and what they consider as reality are shadows. All throughout their lives, they consider those shadows or the reflections of things behind them as reality. But one day, one prisoner was able to escape and was able to encounter reality and the truth outside of the cave. And so the allegory of the cave, in short, is a story of intellectual blindness and liberation. That at one point in time, we are ignorant of something, or we consider untrue things as true. And time should come that we should be liberated from ignorance in order to encounter the truth. The last philosopher I have included here is Aristotle. I think he's most famous for his idea which states that man is irrational animal. And he believes that nothing comes to the intellect without passing first through the senses. And he wrote a lot of books on politics, on ethics, on metaphysics, on organon, that's about logic, and then on poetry, on biology, on zoology, and many other things. That's why Aristotle is said to be a polymath, a person who knows a lot about many things. Right, so we proceed now to medieval. This is the second major period in Western history, medieval history of philosophy. The first philosopher that I have included here is Saint Augustine, and he is famous of his idea that man is not only composed of body and soul, but man primarily is composed as well of free will. And this free will is what makes man unique and different and superior above all other things. And free will as well, once abused, becomes the ultimate cause or the root of evil. Saint Augustine tried to explain the existence of evil in the world. Why is there evil in the world? And we cannot blame or hold God responsible for the existence of evil. Rather, we can blame or we can hold man or humanity responsible for the existence of evil in the world, not God. Another medieval philosopher is Boethius, who believes that real happiness cannot be rooted on material goods or material things, but rather by contemplating on spiritual or philosophical things. Material things may give us happiness, but it will not give us real happiness, because real happiness is rooted on spiritual or philosophical things. Another philosopher is Dionysius. He introduced the idea of heavenly spirits. Now, the heavenly spirits are the ones that connect human beings to God. Okay? Another philosopher is John Scotus Erigena. He is famous of his work on the division of nature, where he explained the fourfold division of nature, namely, nature that creates and not created, nature that is created and creates, nature that is created and does not create, and nature that neither creates nor is created. And man belongs under nature that is created and does not create. This refers to the world of things and the external effects of primordial causes. Another philosopher is Saint Anselm of Canterbury. He was famous of his ontological argument on God's existence, which states that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. Okay. When you think of God, or our concept of God, is someone who is superior or supreme. Okay. We cannot think anymore of any being higher than God, because God, again, is that than which nothing greater can be thought. Another philosopher is Saint Albert the Great. He subscribed to the teachings of Aristotle, and he was the one who passed it on to Aquinas. And he believes that we can obtain certain knowledge of God, like God as immutable, God as eternal, and God as one. Or knowledge of God like immutability, eternity, and unicity. The greatest medieval philosopher is Saint Thomas Aquinas. Most of the teachings in Catholicism, or some of the teachings in Catholicism, are influenced by the philosophy of Saint Thomas Aquinas. And he tried to reconcile faith and reason. And he provided 5 ways to prove God's existence. Another medieval philosopher is William of Ockham. He introduced the idea of mysticism that says that an individual can have an experience with a divine reality through the spiritual exercise of mysticism. For him, the union of God and man is an experience beyond rationality, or it is something that cannot be explained by human reason. Now we turn to modern history of philosophy. Now this is not the third major era in Western philosophy. Now the first philosopher here is Niccolo Machiavelli. For him, a corrupt society requires a strong government, and his famous work or book is entitled The Prince. In that book, he stated that monarchy or rule by a single person was the most preferable form of government, since republics are rarely well ordered. Okay, so when he said republics, he's referring to a democratic form of government. For him, monarchy is better than democracy. Another philosopher here is Blaise Pascal. He believed that human reason is incapable of obtaining the most important of life's truths. And he's famous for the statement, the heart has its own reasons which the reason does not understand. Another philosopher in modern history is Thomas Hobbes, and he is well known for his social contract theory. Now basically, the social contract theory explains that we live in a society, and living in a society implies that we need to surrender some of our rights so that other people may enjoy their rights. Okay? As if every man should say to every man, I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man or to this assembly of men on this condition that the other individual does the same thing. For Thomas Hobbes, there is no such a thing as absolute freedom when we live in a society, because living in a society means that we have to give up, we have to surrender some of our rights for purposes of preserving social order and harmony. We now continue with René Descartes. René Descartes is considered as the father of modern philosophy for the reason that he introduced an entirely different way of thinking or arriving at the truth. He made famous the method known as skepticism. And skepticism is basically doubting in order to arrive at the truth. In order for you to attain clear and distinct knowledge, or in order for you to arrive at the truth, you have to literally doubt everything. In fact, he doubted his own existence, or the existence of his own self. That's why, towards the end of his own doubting of his own self, he was led to the conclusion, which is cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I exist. On the whole, skepticism subscribes to the idea that we should not immediately believe the things that we see and hear, but rather we should validate them, we should verify them, we should examine them, we should analyze them before we accept them as true. In fact, he said that if you would be a real seeker of truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt as far as possible all things. In our age right now, wherein fake news is so prevalent in social media, we therefore are challenged to practice doubting, to doubt and never to accept immediately as true things that we see and hear from around us. That's from Descartes. Now the next philosopher is Bart Spinoza. He believed that only knowledge can lead us to happiness, for only through knowledge can we be liberated from the bondage of our passions. And we are enslaved by passions when our desires are attached to perishable things or material things, and when we do not fully understand our emotions. So we have to understand who we are, we have to understand what our emotions are, we have to gain as much knowledge as possible in order for us to have happiness. Now another philosopher is John Locke, who believes that our mind is like a blank sheet of paper, or known also as tabula rasa, that our mind is empty at birth, and only experience can subsequently give us knowledge. And so it makes sense to believe that experience is the best teacher. We also have George Berkeley in modern philosophy with his provocative formula that states to be is to be perceived. We have to have a sensual experience or sensory experience of something before we can say that such thing exists. We also have David Hume, who believes that moral assessments are not judgments about the truth and falsehood of anything. Instead, moral assessments are emotional reactions. Our belief that something is moral or immoral is not purely a product of reason. There is also an emotion that come into play with our moral judgment or moral assessments. Say for example, when you believe that abortion is immoral or abortion should not be practiced, we are saying this because we feel pity to the fetus or to the organism whose life we are trying to take away. And so, we believe that abortion is immoral because we feel pity to the life that we are ending. And so that judgment that abortion is immoral for David Hume is not purely a product of reason, but also an interplay of emotion. We also have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote a book titled The Social Contract, which aims to provide an answer to the question of why people ought to obey laws of government. The obvious reason why we need to obey laws of government is to preserve order and harmony. Though laws may reduce to a certain degree our exercise of freedom or liberty, however, it has a positive social effect. That is, if we follow laws of the government, granting that these laws are justifiably good to be followed, then it will give us a society which is ideal to live in. He's famous also with a statement that says, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Now these chains refer to the laws that the government wants to impose. Now these laws may somehow limit us from exercising fully our liberty and our freedom, but somehow it also results to a well-ordered society. Now, another philosopher here is Immanuel Kant. And Immanuel Kant is known, among other things, known in the field of moral philosophy. And his moral philosophy can somehow be captured in his theory known as categorical imperative. Now, this categorical imperative is captured in his formula that says, act only on that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Now, in order to understand this statement, we have to distinguish the difference between maxim and law. Maxim is a personal, subjective principle that guides or directs your action. Now, not all maxims can be universalized, and only maxims which can be universalized are considered as moral principles of a particular action. For example, stealing. Stealing is an act whose maxim is something that cannot be universalized. Meaning to say, we cannot imagine a world where everyone steals the property of another. Because if everyone steals the property of another, even the property of the person from whom he stole that property from would not want other people to steal that property that he stole from someone else. And so, stealing is something that cannot be universalized. Hence, stealing is immoral. So somehow, Kant is indirectly giving us a clue or hint how to assess actions. And the morality of actions is assessed based on its capability to be universalized. If it can be universalized, like, for example, I help someone else. If people will be helping each other, then it will create a beautiful world. And so helping someone else is something that can be universalized, hence it is something morally good. While stealing the property of others is something that cannot be universalized, hence stealing is not morally good. Now we turn to the last major period in Western philosophy, and this is postmodernity or contemporary philosophy. Now, the first philosopher I have in my presentation is Soren Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard is the father of existentialism. Existentialism is a school of thought that believes that our individual choices, our individual decisions should be respected by someone else. We should live the kind of life that we personally decided to have. We should not let anyone else dictate the kind of life that we want. That's the philosophy of Soren Kierkegaard and existentialism in general. That we should honor and we should respect every person's decision and choices in life. Another philosopher is Karl Marx. He developed a scheme of social analysis and social revolution. Now, for us to better understand Karl Marx's philosophy, it's good to trace the historical background, specifically the economic condition during the time when he was philosophizing. He lived in a time wherein there is so much economic injustice or inequality. He personally saw that there is inequality among people in the society. That's why his philosophy focused on the establishment of a society which is classless, wherein everyone is equal. No one is labeled as rich, no one is labeled as poor, and no person owns more and no person owns less, because in the society that he projects to have, which is communism, is a kind of society wherein all things are governed and owned by the government. There is no such thing as private property, and everyone equally enjoys the same thing. That's Karl Marx.